All right, so we're almost at the end of the semester. It's pretty exciting. Um, Today, I want to just talk about what's going to happen over these next couple weeks, and basically what's this final exam going to look like. All right, so I've got the calendar up for you right here, and so you can see that tomorrow we are just reviewing targets 5.2 and 5.3. Those are the two newer lessons that you haven't been assessed on yet. And so I've got an actual like practice problems, like a worksheet. Look at this. I know it's not Delta Math. Crazy, right? So I've got actual problems for you to work on. And so you don't have to print this out or anything. You just work them out in your notebook. And these are just problems to help you get ready for targets 5.2 and 5.3. And so 5.2 was solving quadratic equations. Three different ways you've got to show this. Solve them by factoring, solve them by using the quadratic formula, and then solve them by completing the square. So you have to demonstrate all three of those techniques. And then target 5.3 was graphing quadratic functions. And so for these problems, we've got two different ways of writing an equation. These first four are in standard form, whereas these next four are in that vertex form that looks a little bit different. And so you need to be able to graph them from both formats. And so I've got a bunch of problems for you to practice those skills. I gave you that chart in the lesson on earlier this week on how to find like the vertex or the intercepts or things like that. And the key thing is we want you to plot at least 5 points. It doesn't have to be those 5 critical points. As we saw in some of the examples I worked on in the lesson, sometimes there aren't any x-intercepts. You know, if the parabola doesn't cross the x-axis, there's nothing you can do. Or maybe the y-intercept is, way higher than our graph actually shows. Our graph only goes up to 5, and maybe the y-intercept's at 300. So obviously we can't plot that or its mirror point. In that case, just always start with the vertex and just move like 1 point to the left or right, and then just plug that into the equation, get your y value. That's the simplest way to get those additional points, to get enough to sketch the graph. All right. Also, I've got the answers up here so you can check your work to make sure you're doing them correctly. So those are all right here for you. And so the best thing to do is work through a couple of the problems, in each section, and maybe 3 or 4 of them, try them on your own first. Review your example problems from the lessons. Be like, okay, what am I supposed to do for this one? Try to work through it again on your own. Then check the answers to see how you did. Oh, did I get this right? If so, that's great. You should feel good about that, and then move on to the next problem. So this is all that you're going to be doing. I guess the only new kind of stuff for class tomorrow and or Friday. And so I'm also going to have some Delta Math problems for you on all of the final exam learning targets, which I'm going to get to in a moment. I'm still just waiting for a few more students to sign in. And so work through these. This homework is not going to be graded. I'm not going to collect it. It's 100% for all of you to practice, to make sure you understand that you know how to solve these problems and that you've learned these topics. All right, so that is going to be class Thursday, Friday this week, just basically reviewing those. Class next week, Monday, Tuesday, and that Wednesday, just a review day. And so, again, I'm going to have some practice problems posted for you, and I'm going to have some Delta Math final exam review posted for you that's got like the key topic in each of these learning targets for you to practice to get ready for the final. And then cohort B, your final exam will be next week, Thursday for first hour. And then cohort A, you're going to take it the following Tuesday on the 19th. All right. And so let's talk about what's going to be on that final exam and what it's going to look like. Okay, so the Algebra 2 Semester 1 final exam. That's going to be a bit different than other final exams you've had in the past. Dun, dun, dun. So first off, as we've been grading on a target-based grading system this whole year, we are going to still assess on various learning targets from earlier in the year. And just because, we don't want you to take a test one time and then, forget it the next day. These should be long-term, long-enduring targets that you've truly learned and understood, at this point moving forward. That means that you've really learned something if you can still recall it in the future. And so what we've done is decided that these 3 learning targets right here, 1.3, 4.1, and 4.5, you've already assessed on these learning targets before earlier in the year, some of them multiple times. You're going to reassess on them again on the final exam. And these 3 are the key targets that you're really going to need to know pretty well moving forward. So these solving absolute value inequalities, that had a bunch of different skills that we want you to focus on that students still struggled with, especially those special cases when the solution was all real numbers or no solutions. 4.1, basic operations on polynomials. That was things like, adding and subtracting, the multiplication. Think about when you had like a binomial times a binomial and you had to distribute everything like that, or a trinomial times a trinomial, those types of problems. But the newer skill that we're going to focus more on is going to be the long division and synthetic division. So those are the 2 brand new skills that you learned this year, whereas the other operations were just kind of a review from Algebra 1. So you'll still have maybe like 3 questions on adding, subtracting, and multiplying. But then you're going to have, just like on your earlier tests on this target, you're going to have 2 questions where you have to demonstrate that you know how to use long division on polynomials, and 2 questions where you have to demonstrate that you know how to use synthetic division. And again, this is an essential skill that you need to know moving forward in your next mathematics class. All right. And then finally, target 4.5, which is on solving radical equations. So that's the root. And so students were still struggling on that. It's a newer concept, but you need to understand how to work with higher degrees, higher exponents. Because again, up to this point, you pretty much have just done, or prior to this year, you just worked with a square and a square root. But now we need to look at those higher roots and higher exponents that you're going to be working with. So these 3 targets, everyone will reassess on these 3. Now, the 2 newer targets, 5.2 and 5.3, which is what I've got that review already set for you for class tomorrow. These 2 targets, this will be your first time assessing on this target. And, that's how it works at the end of the year. There's some topics that you don't get to reassess on. And this will be your first time testing on these 2 topics. And so normally we would squeeze in a test before the final exam, but due to COVID and the crazy schedule this year, we just don't have time for that. And so we're going to have everyone assess on these 2 for the first time on the final exam. So solving quadratics for real and imaginary solutions. So you should need to be able to demonstrate those 3 different techniques: solving quadratics by factoring them, by completing the square, and by using the quadratic formula. And then finally, 5.3, this was your lesson from the beginning of the week, graphing quadratic equations. And again, I've got those practice problems posted for you on the calendar. So plotting the vertex and 4 other points to show that you can graph that parabola. So there are 5 targets that will be on your final exam that everybody's going to assess on. Now, another piece that is going to be new for this final is, instead of testing on every single thing you've learned throughout the entire semester, which is so much, not all of that's really relevant, and that's why we're focusing on these key targets right here. But we do want to give you the opportunity to reassess on any older learning targets. So these are all the other targets that you have assessed on at some point throughout this year. And so what we're going to do to make this exam a little bit different and a little bit more personal for you, and to give you one last chance to reassess on something. Maybe you realize, hey, I didn't understand solving systems of equations back then, early in the year we tested on it, but I've practiced it. And now I'm ready to demonstrate that, yeah, I am proficient at this skill. I do understand how to use like substitution and elimination or whatever. And you're going to get a chance to then reassess on that. So we've got all these different learning targets here, and you get to choose between 2 and 4 of these additional learning targets that you would like to assess on. Now remember, this is in addition to these 5. So you still just have your standard 95-minute block that we've been testing in, and So you might not want to pick 4 that you really struggled with because you may not have time for all those. Maybe just pick 2 or 3 that you think, hey, you know what? I can definitely improve on this one. I understand it so much better now. And I know I can bring up my grade and demonstrate that I understand this topic. So you're going to select between 2 and 4 of these. I've got a Google form that you're going to fill out either today or later on this week, where you're going to let me know which targets you'd like to assess on. Now, after you've made the selection, so you're going to determine this, look at your grades, look at some of the homework problems on different targets to try to think, okay, do I know this? Look at your the lessons on these. Can I learn this? Do I think that I'm confident in doing this? Or maybe you're like, oh, I really bombed that one target. I'm going to work on that, and I want to demonstrate that I do understand it. Then come the final exam, I'm going to print out copies of the test for each of these different units, for units 1 through 4, with all the targets for it. So it's going to look something like this. Dun, 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 and this is the final exam buffet. Now it's going to look a little different for you. This was what I did last year. And so what's going to happen is on final exam day, you are going to, once you get here, once class starts, you're going to go to the back of the room and you're going to basically make this buffet line and just walk right down and build your own test. So you start over here on the left. That'll be the main test that everybody is going to take. So everyone takes one of the white copies of the test that has those 5 learning targets that everybody is going to assess on, right? Those 3 old ones and then the 2 newer ones, 5.2 and 5.3. Then you kind of move down the line and you just pick up a test that has the targets that you want to assess on. Now, to save paper, I'm not going to do like one sheet of paper for each learning target. I'm instead, this year, I'm going to be grouping them together per unit. So I'll have like the first sheet, it won't necessarily be this color, but the first sheet will be unit 1. This will be unit 2, unit 3, unit 4, and unit 5. And so if you're going to assess, let's say on 2 targets from unit 2 and 1 target from unit 4, what you would do is on this buffet line, you grab the main test, then you grab the unit 2 test and you'd grab the unit 4 test. All right, just those copies. And then at the end, there's going to be a stapler and you just staple them all together. Then when you go back to your desk and start taking your test, when you get to that unit 2 test, it's going to have all 3 targets on here, but any ones that you're not assessing on, you just don't answer. All right, you just leave them totally blank. So just because you grab a test doesn't mean you need to assess on it, on a target, I mean. All right, and so same thing, if you just want to assess on target 4.3 in unit 4, you're going to have the other targets, 4.2 and 4.4, but you're just going to leave those blank when you take your test, okay? Along with that, if you decide last minute, like when you have the test, if you said, oh, I wanted to assess on 4.2, but now after looking at it, I think I'd do better at 4.3. If you want to change your mind right then on the test, that's fine with me, all right? You still just need to assess on at least 2 additional learning targets, and you can kind of pick and choose. But what I don't want you to do is if you decide to do something on unit 4, this week, but then come final exam, you're like, oh, I'd rather reassess on unit 5. I'm not going to necessarily have enough copies for you, right? Because if you grab unit 4, well, you're going to have all 3 of those targets to kind of pick and choose from. And so that's going to be how the final exam will work. Back on my P-Learning page, let me zoom out a little bit. In order to let me know which targets you'd like to reassess on, simply go to my main page here, clicking on Pages. And on the left side, you've got your general welcome page that you start off on that tells you, hey, here's what we're doing this week. And then there's a new tab over here called Final Exam. Click on Final Exam. And just a reminder, so this is where you're going to choose which targets. You're going to let me know which targets you want to reassess on. And so you must select between 2 and 4 additional targets. You just click on Target Selection Form, and here's just a simple Google form. It reminds you that the first semester exam will cover these 5 targets. So everybody is going to be assessing on these 5. That's part of the main exam packet. Enter your name so know who you are, which hour class you're in. And then here at the bottom, this is where you're going to choose between 2 and 4 additional learning targets. So you can say, oh, you know what? I want to work on systems of equations, adding and subtracting matrices, and I don't know, the rational exponents and radicals. Okay, so you can just choose like those three. You just check them, hit submit. All right. Now, if you change your mind, all right, so I'd like you to fill this out by Friday. You can do it today. You can do it right now if you know, oh, I want to definitely do these targets. But you might want to take some time to think about this before the end of the day on Friday is when I'm going to submit it. Because over the weekend, I'm going to, make copies of the final exam and make sure that I've got enough. So if no one wants to assess on targets 1.1 and 1.2, I'm not going to print any copies of that. So you need to let me know by Friday which of these you definitely are going to reassess on so I can have that all ready for you. If you do change your mind before Friday, so today, what if you rush into it and then you're like, wait, no, I don't want to do 4.3, I want to do 4.2. Just fill out the form again and send me an email so I know to look for your two different submissions, and I'll pick the more recent of the two. Okay. One last thing about the final exam is if any of you want to exempt the final exam, that's totally fine. I've had a number of students already who said that they would like to exempt the final. The only issue with that is I still need to get a grade for you on these two learning targets, 5.2 and 5.3, since you haven't assessed on those yet. So you have two options. If you want to come in next week, if you're in cohort A, I can just let you take the test on these two targets during class time next week. If you're in cohort B, well, next week you'll be taking the final exam during class. So if you want to just assess on these, this is again, if you're exempting the final, you can come in on Wednesday morning. So we're here, for your classes don't start till 9:30. Come in the morning at 7:30 or 8, and you can assess on just these two targets and still make it home in time for your first virtual class at 9:30. So if you're in cohort B, you have that option. Now, another possibility is if you want to exempt the final, but you also want to perhaps reassess on maybe one or two older learning targets. That's also something I'm going to allow. So if you'd like to exempt the final, but still retake a certain target, what I want you to do is fill out this form still and choose which additional targets you'd like to reassess on. But you will not need to then assess on these other three targets. You'll still come in during the final exam time, and because you still need to test on 5.2 and 5.3, but maybe you just want to reassess on target 1.1, for example. So then what I'll do is I'll make a test for you that's just got 5.2, 5.3, and 1.1. And that's if you're exempting the final. So that way you're still getting a grade for the new targets that you haven't assessed on yet, and you still have another option to retake. And then you can still exempt the final exam where you don't have to take these other required retake targets. All right, I think that's everything that I wanted to talk to you about today. Let me open it up to any questions. Is there anything else that any of you want me to go over again, or that you're not sure about, or what the expectations are for the next week?